Welcome, everyone, to the Aging and Spirituality podcast. We are super incredibly excited today because we have somebody here by the name of Mark Wilkinson. I would call him a voice coach. He calls himself a vocal health specialist. He's so much more than that. I'm going to just give you an idea. I mean, just looking into what he's done and some of the things that he's devoted himself to is really, really amazing. So let me just give you a little bio of what I've discovered about Mark. He describes himself as a professional talker, finding silence in nature, and that gives you a really great insight into his inner character. I really was looking at how many, he's so multidimensional as a teacher, has so many things that he has to offer. He's a yoga teacher, he's a certified personal trainer, so body on top of everything else. He's a performing artist. He's a lead soloist, so he's a singer. He's a storyteller. He's a guest lecturer at the University of Toronto. He is an anti-bullying advocate, one of my things that I love to pay attention to, and a suicide prevention trainer, another thing that touches me dear to my heart. He's also a community builder. He teaches what he calls joyful classes, right up our alley, and workshops. So, you know, I mean, I don't know if you listeners out there have tried what he's already accomplished, but holy moly, what a long list. This is a fellow with a very big vision. So we're very excited to kind of dig into this. You can hear there's a lot to dig into here. A lot of interesting questions and a lot of tangents that we can go off on here, but we're really looking, you know, our podcast is about giving you some tips on what you can do to learn to sing more. You know, if you haven't done that yet in your life, that's very exciting. And we're going to also discuss the connection between singing and finding your spiritual center. So listeners, if that interests you, stay tuned. We are just about to get rolling here. So I wanted to just ask you, your profile says you actually live in Ottawa. I am a Canadian. I was born in Niagara Falls and came to California in my early 20s because I was seeking that spiritual teaching that was my full calling. Chris is actually a New Yorker who came to California for the same thing, and she was one of my first teachers and mentors in yoga.
I hesitate to say a New Yorker because I've lived in California a lot longer than I lived there.
So, a lot longer. Yeah. A lot longer. So do you still live in Ottawa?
I sure do. Yep. I've lived in many different parts of Ottawa, but it's been home on and off for about, 16 years now. So it's really feeling like home these days.
Where were you born?
Kingston, Ontario.
Oh my God. Same place my mother was.
Oh, there you go. Small world.
That's crazy. I haven't been back to Niagara Falls in a long time, but I'm always, you know, when you're born there, it's always in your heart. Always a Canadian in my heart.
I'm sure my accent will make you feel right at home.
I won't even notice it. She might, but I won't.
Yeah.
Okay, so
as you know, our podcast is all about aging and spirituality, and a lot of our listeners are people over 50 who they would have liked to take voice lessons and learn to sing, but they haven't done it. And what would you tell them? I mean, do you have to be young? Is there, you know, what would your advice to them be?
One of the first things I always say about singing is that singing is a whole body, whole person experience. So there is no such thing as being too young or too old to sing, because all you're doing is bringing more of a life lived to your voice. You have more things to share with your voice, because I always like to say the word voice in two ways. There's voice from what we know of the sound, the technical aspect of it, but there's also your voice. What do you have to say? What do people remember you by based on the way you speak, right? We all can associate ourselves with hearing people talk, and there's certain people in our lives when we hear their voice, we just go, right? It's just comforting to hear their voice. So when we get too technical, when we get too comparative, when we worry about success and fame attaching itself to the voice, we can forget that everybody has a voice. So there is no such thing as too early or too late to sing, because singing is just an expression, hopefully, of who you are. And I would imagine, if anything, for people who are at a later stage in life, they just bring more to the table because they've lived a life, so they have an extra depth to their voice.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
And how would you say that singing is connected to spirituality?
I mean, do we have 3 hours? No.
Not.
It's
Main ways.
it is a spiritual experience because when you are singing well and enjoying it, it's like it comes from somewhere else. If you're really living in that flow state that we talk about when I teach my yoga classes, I talk about a moving meditation. It's just a meditation with some movement added to it. Singing, if you're really in the zone, if you're really in character as an actor, feeling the song, feeling the lyrics, I often don't remember my performances. This is one of the things I love to share with people.
You're just
Wow.
being
People
an
ask me,
instrument. Yeah.
they go,
Right.
how did that go? I went, I
don't
don't know.
know.
Because I'm in the moment and I'm just letting it hopefully flow out of me. Because remember, if I'm focusing on how I'm sounding, I'm not doing what I need to do. I'm not
Right.
focused and I'm not honed in to let the audience have an interpretation of the song as well. So for me,
Wow.
as an actor, as a singer, when I'm in that moment as that character or through that poet, whatever it may be, it's innately spiritual because it's just coming and pouring out of me.
So I have to ask, interrupt you for a minute here, Chris, because that just, I mean, you're talking about being a pure vessel for spirit while you're on stage, while you're singing. So, and actually one of my big questions, it's in here somewhere, I'm gonna maybe pop it in now, but talking about being in flow state, in divine flow state, when you're making that connection and you say you kind of forget what's happening, but wait a minute, your awareness has to be somewhere, in that character, in the words, in the song, in the energy that's happening between you and the audience and all of those dynamics that are happening. But spirit is basically flowing through you and singing in a way that they can feel what that divine energy feels like. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Absolutely. It's the
Okay.
balance of the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious.
Okay.
It's being aware enough to negotiate the stage, to navigate the stage, to remember your words, but it's also allowing all the practice that you do. It's why I like the word practice.
Yeah.
And what I love in French, the word for practice is répétition, which means repetition. You have to do it, do it, do it, do it. So that by the time I get on stage, I allow all of the work that I did consciously practicing just happen.
Cool. Yeah.
You let it go, and you know that you can't control a sound once it's left your mouth, right? Once you've made a sound, you can't edit what you've already sung. And so we wish we could sometimes, but we just let it flow. And so for me, it's really about balancing that parasympathetic and that sympathetic nervous system response, being alert enough, as you just hinted at, to be present and aware, because things happen on stage. If someone forgets a word or an orchestra doesn't come in or you don't come in, things happen on stage, of course.
Right.
But being conscious and allowing that unconscious work to just sort of come out of you is one of the most, dare I say, terrifying and exciting things that you can do, because you just have to say, here we go.
Yes.
You have to just give in and not control what you can't control.
And it's the beauty of life. It you allow it to happen through you, and there is that state of surrender that's going on. And I know Chris has questions too. We both are people that have studied voice. I, a long time ago in my 30s, and Chris, when she got along a little later, wanted to learn to do it, to chant and things like that. And so I know I want to get back to her being able to ask some questions, but the one thing I want to really ask you about is singing is very healing. When you sing and you allow that spiritual energy to come through you, if there's something that's blocking you on a somatic level or unconscious level, emotional level, whatever's going on, it's going to become very apparent to you. Was that your experience? And do you talk to people about how to handle that?
Absolutely, because so much of what blocks us when it comes to singing is the ego. Attaching that success and, I have to get it right, especially when you do it professionally, because doing it right gets you paid, which pays your bills.
Right. Exactly.
And so for professionals, I've actually found that sometimes amateurs, where the stakes are so much lower, are the ones who just let it out and let it be free, because they don't have as much quote unquote riding on the success of that song or that performance or whatever it may be. So my work, especially with my professionals, is a lot of letting go of that need to control
Yeah.
what comes next. So absolutely, that's just such a part of that nervous system response to the act of singing, and
Yeah.
letting go of the ego and getting a healthy relationship with the ego. I mean, we all have one, it's there. So how do you embrace it? How do you let it be what it
Work
is?
with it,
And
yeah.
how do you use it to fuel you in the right way? Because obviously, as a professional, you want to do well. Of course, it's our job to be on time, to be kind, to do the work that we set out to do, to sing well. But that can be very hard in a subjective art form, right?
Yeah.
Because people might like this voice or not like this voice. So when you attach that externality to singing, it's very hard not to sort of try to look outside yourself and to just sort of go in and stay in the moment. So in terms of that somatic response, I mean, that's most of my voice lessons with my students, is how do we get back into the body when the mind is going, danger, danger, right?
Danger.
Something's going on here. So it's a beautiful parallel to the yoga practice, because I always say to my students, just like life, you might not know what the next pose is that's coming up, but how you respond to the cue that I give you, how you breathe through that movement to the next pose makes a big difference.
And that's actually a good tip that you can give our listeners right now. And that is, in that moment when you're working with the student and you realize you've hit an ego spot and you want them to surrender at that moment, what do you get them to do?
I get them to remember that they've probably stopped breathing. I have found universally they're exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen, but they're not breathing.
Yeah.
And what's amazing, whether it's my yoga students, my singing students, but particularly my personal training clients, if I ask them to exhale when it's hard, they go, oh, okay, there we go. And all of a sudden, the movement pattern, you just see the body just go into alignment. So I always say to my yoga students, I like to tease them. I say, did you notice how quiet the room got? And then all of a sudden I hear, and they take this big breath. And it's because they're thinking. Yeah. They're in the mind. They're forgetting to sink into that breath. So I have found that universal inhale and universal exhale across the board to be missing when people are in that ego moment.
There you go, listeners. Anytime you run up against a problem that you can't solve, breathe.
I always say one of my mantras is breathe, smile, repeat. Breathe, smile, repeat.
Chris knows that well. She's a pranayama teacher, so she knows.
Perfect.
Yeah, there's nothing like breathing. That really, one deep breath can do it.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned something about myths and human voice. So can you talk a little bit about what you found?
I'm sorry, you cut out when you said that word. What am I talking
about?
Oh,
myths. Sorry.
Oh, myths. No, that's fine. Yeah. Good old Zoom, eh?
I know. We love it. It's,
Exactly. So in terms of myths about the singing voice, the first one that I usually start with is the most common one of all, which is sing from your diaphragm. Even the most lay person has heard that about the voice, sing from the diaphragm. And it's one of the questions that I get asked all the time. Is that true? And I always say, no, it's not true. Now, it's partially true. I always say in life, people do their best and they mean their best, right? People come to their life with the best of intentions. The reason people talk about the diaphragm is that the diaphragm is the most important muscle of inhalation. It is the single most important muscle for taking in air. So the expansion of the ribs is because the diaphragm descends and that pulls the lungs down. Nature doesn't like a vacuum, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. So it fills that area of low pressure in the lungs with air. So you breathe and you expand. The thing is, my friends, do we sing on an inhale or an exhale?
X.
Right. We sing on an exhale. We don't sing on an inhale.
That's the lyric.
It'd be very hard to do. I've tried it before. It's very hard to sing. I mean, you wouldn't want to. We sing on an exhale. But the diaphragm, as I just said, is a muscle of inhalation. So the diaphragm, once you finish that inhale and it's stretched, once you start exhaling, it's now inactive. It is just returning back to its regular dome-like state. And the diaphragm, my friends who are listening today, is not behind your belly button. It's much higher in your body than you think. When people put their hand on their belly button, when they were in children's choir, you go, shh, 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 shh. and they do the thing with the diaphragm.
Yes.
That's not your diaphragm. Your
No.
diaphragm is actually right along your
Underneath
ribs.
it.
It's
Rib.
much closer to your sternum than you think. Sort
Yeah.
of traces your ribs in this dome-like shape. So if we sing on an exhale, we know that the diaphragm is not actually as important as we think for singing out. And by the way, diaphragmatic breathing, that's another one I find interesting. Okay, everyone, we're going to practice our diaphragmatic breathing. Here's the thing, if you weren't diaphragmatically breathing, you wouldn't be breathing at all. The diaphragm has to move up and down in order for you to breathe. What we're talking about when we think we're saying diaphragmatic breathing is the expansion and what I like to call the extension of your exhale. So may I make a little singing here for you? May I do
Yes.
that? All right. So if I make a sound and I let all of my air out really, really quickly, like a balloon when you accidentally let it go, and it all sort
Yeah.
of collapse, what
Yeah.
ends up happening is you get this, and everything collapses, and it's
Okay.
really, really, really breathy, right? Whereas, what if I allow my body to stay really open, and I'm going to ask my rib cage not to collapse as quickly. And then my larynx stays down. It doesn't go up into my throat. And now I have this controlled sense of air. So what I'm doing to give credence to the diaphragm idea is I'm not letting my diaphragm ascend as quickly. Because of my rib cage staying open, the lungs aren't losing air quite as quickly, so the diaphragm is more slowly returning back to rest. But I'm not doing that with my diaphragm. I'm doing that with my ribs, with my expansion of my body, feeling the back staying open, and my desire to know I've got a long phrase to come, which means the larynx helps naturally regulate the airflow. But the diaphragm, when you are exhaling, is passive. It has absolutely nothing to do with an active sense of breath. What you're feeling behind the belly button is your abdominal wall. You're feeling your rectus abdominis, which is your six pack, as we like to call it, right? You're feeling the obliques, you're feeling the transverse abdominis, right? And so those muscles now, right at the end of the phrase, are going to start to engage because they are very important muscles of exhalation, but they are not your diaphragm. So that was a very Dr. Mark explanation. I hope everyone's still with me, but it's a really, really important explanation for yogis as well.
Right.
Because it's this idea of as you're in a pose, especially in any pose where your arms are lifted, can you feel the expansion of your ribs and not worry so much about the diaphragm, which is actually quite passive when you're exhaling. So that's a huge myth that I hear all the time. The second myth that I would say about singing very quickly is that there are people who just can't sing. What I always like to say is everyone can sing, but almost no one can sing well. Right? And of course, if your litmus test is Whitney Houston, well then no one can sing. But if your litmus test is everybody who's done the youth choir, a church choir, a community choir, a musical theater choir, maybe they were in the school show when they were in high school, everybody can sing. But yes, there are very few Whitney Houstons in the world, right? So it's all about what you're used to. And then the third one is tone deafness. People think that there's such a thing as tone deafness. And I'll tell you, my friends, there's no such thing as being tone deaf. If you were tone deaf, you wouldn't recognize your mother's voice on the phone. If you were tone deaf, you wouldn't be able to shift gears in a car, because most of shifting gears in a car on a standard car is, it's gotten too high, so you can tell that it's time to shift gears. So those are probably the top three.
The breathing thing is so interesting because when you're talking about expanding the ribs, that's what's happening when you're doing postures, right? Like say you're in the star pose, that's exactly what's happening. And it makes me think of this book I actually read recently, and the woman was talking about the premise of the book was moving in the darkness and not running away from it. But what I got from this breathing exercise was, at some point when you're meditating, you get to a place where you're not diaphragmatically breathing, right? It's like every cell in your body is breathing and there's a pause there. Do you ever experience that when you're singing? Do you ever have that feeling of just like your body is breathing for you, or is your mechanism just like so strong and so trained that it just like continually is going? Because you have to be in some kind of a spiritual state when you're doing what you're talking about doing.
I think it's honestly both. I think it's about that idea I mentioned earlier of practicing it from a mechanical, technical standpoint to be able to do what you need to do.
Right.
But then, yes, the other half is just letting go. And I almost sometimes feel like I'm breathing in through my ears, I'm breathing in through my nose, my mouth.
That's
It's
what I'm
like
talking about. Yes.
my pores are breathing in for me so
Yes.
that I don't have to worry about being a singer and doing that sort of posture thing, because that's another word I'm not a huge fan of, because posture makes us stand up really tall, but it locks everything up, right? So I like the word structure. I like the word balance. How
Yeah.
balanced am I over my feet so that it allows my body to expand? And then, yes, Kathy, absolutely. It just then feels like the air's coming in from every which
Everywhere.
way, but it's meeting the training. It really is that beautiful
Yes.
mix of spirit and letting go, but also practice. And
Right.
when those meet, that brings us back down to earth and reminds us that we're human too, right? So I find that beautiful balance of humbling myself to the fact that I have to be somewhat ready to be imperfect,
Right.
and also be ready to embrace the imperfection on a spiritual level. So it's both.
It's both, but like the way you're talking about it, and I'm thinking from my listener's point of view, you're going to do something that a lot of people are not going to understand. Your mechanics, your practice, your devotion, that kind of dedication is not something that everybody who wants to sing is going to be able to do. But say the person like me, I don't know about Chris, that want, I actually started out singing opera, and I knew
Cool.
that wasn't for me. It was such hard work. And then I, went on to do other vocal training. And what I realized was I loved to sing, but I knew it was never going to be my profession. So, but in terms of using it as a way to stay connected to flow and have the health benefits,
Mm-hmm.
you can still learn this mechanics part of it and get better all the time. And I would say, doesn't it increase the benefits that you get, the health benefits that you get at the same time?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So
Absolutely.
that would be helpful for the listeners. I think that no matter what, if you've never sung before, I mean, just learning the mechanics of it, you're going to be able to breathe better. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't have to go into all the benefits of that right there. As you age, your body is one of your biggest challenges. Talk about the ego. Well, now your body's like talking to you all the time, right? But you also, you're taking a step towards your own spiritual nature because you're connecting to that inner self, letting that flow come through, and you're going to discover things about yourself that you never knew were possible, and be able to tap into states like joy, right? Look at how Chris is smiling. Like that's what singing does for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, for me, it's, I'm someone who did not sing. Okay. And after being a yogi for many years and, and sharing yoga, trying to be an instrument. And I wanted to sing some chants and play the harmonium. And so I decided to take singing lessons. And I was a nervous wreck when I went because I've always been told I couldn't sing. And
Mm-hmm.
most fantastic thing was the singing teacher said to me, there's nothing mysterious about singing. He said, it's just two things. The muscles need to memorize the position and confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was so wonderful. And he said, people like you, he said, I love to teach. He said, because you're like an open book. He said,
Yeah.
when the professionals come in, he said, they have a really hard time.
Yeah.
They're much harder to work with. And so, I made tremendous progress. And for me, it was a very heart expanding experience. It was something I needed to do, so.
And what it does is it reminds us of that phrase that we all use when we say, I want to sing.
Mhm.
What's interesting is if you take out the word I,
Yeah,
which is ego, and you
right.
take out the word want, which is desire, you're
Yeah.
just left with sing.
Sing.
You're
Mhm.
just left with singing. And I always say, okay, but why do we care if we do or don't want to sing? Why don't we just sing?
Mhm.
Why don't we just allow singing to happen
Mhm.
so that we take out that need to be nervous because we've attached some externalized outcome that we don't even know what that is, by the way. It's a totally invented, it's an invented outcome. We can't quantify it. We can't actually explain what it is, but it has something to do with, am I good enough? Will I sound okay? Should I be doing this? Am I wasting, all of these things that the brain loves to chatter on about, right? But if you just take out the I and the want, you just have singing, and then you just sing, and it's so much more fun that way.
More fun, but also, wouldn't you say that it's an experience that makes you feel vulnerable? I mean, how do kids, they naturally will sing, right? But the first time somebody says, "Oh, don't keep your day job," I mean, keep your day job or whatever, you know what I mean? And then it's like, what? Like, what just happened there? You know what I mean? So there's all this vulnerability that's allowed to come when you are singing, and that's, again, listeners, that's one of the reasons to do it. It puts you right in touch with who you are and makes you be vulnerable. And that may feel like a challenge at first, but boy, there's so many gifts in that.
And if I really think back to what you just said, Kathy, about that's interesting to me is the only reason it becomes vulnerable is because of what we do to each other.
Yes.
Kids aren't being vulnerable. They don't know anything differently. They don't know any better or worse. They're just doing it because they have no fear. What we do as adults and young adults with our ego is we start attaching and judging, and then it becomes vulnerable. But if you actually think about it, what you just said is that it was never vulnerable. It was just completely natural. Right. So that vulnerability actually comes from this world that I'm trying to put more positivity into and change from this judgy world that we live in to a space where it doesn't have to be so vulnerable to sing, because we never judge ourselves or each other for doing natural things that we've always wanted to do. And so it's really, I love the way you put that, because it reminds you in a way that it's kind of silly, in a fun way. It's silly that it has to be vulnerable, that we live in a world where we would judge each other for doing something so natural and normal. Because remember, songs have been passed down through generations and generations, through cultures and cultures, from mothers to sons to daughters. I mean, it's been passed down through millennia, and yet it's vulnerable. And this isn't directed at you, Kathy. You just made me think of it. It's just sort of it makes me think, how crazy is that?
How crazy is that? And thank you for saying that. I love that you said that, because, then we get to this age and we're like, what in the hell are we doing? We are cutting off joy in our life. We're doing nutty things. And then all of a sudden it doesn't look so vulnerable to do it, like you would talk about it as when you were a kid, but you start thinking, geez, I could do that. I don't have to die without trying.
Never.
I hope we have a bunch of singers coming to this one. This will be really good.
And the best part about singing at any age, especially as you move into later stages of life, is people often ask about the wobble that starts to come into people's voices as they age, or their voice isn't as strong as it used to be when they were younger. One of the best cures for that is singing. Because like any muscle in the body, if you don't use it, it atrophies, right? There is atrophy because there's a muscle in the vocal cords. One of the major parts of the layers of the vocal cords, or about 5 layers to the vocal folds, is a muscle called the thyroarytenoid muscle, because it starts in the thyroid and attaches in the arytenoids behind. And so the more you use it, the less it atrophies, and the more firm of a closure you get to the cords, less wobble, more voice to play with your grandchildren, play with your great-grandchildren, and you keep the voice healthy by using it. What a beautiful reason to do it. It gets better by using it. Perfect.
I love that. But what it makes me think about is the vagus nerve. You were talking about the larynx before, but I do a lot of work when I just try to get to release, all the tension across the shoulders and the neck and, back of the head that nobody ever thinks about, but comes a lot when you get older, especially when you're sitting way too dang much, and that's another benefit. If you do that, that will help loosen up your voice, the way you talk, the way you communicate with people.
Because the larynx is innervated by the vagus nerve.
Oh, okay.
It is the cranial nerve. You cannot make your voice sound without your vagus nerve. It is the single nerve that innervates all of the muscles of the larynx. So
that's what you're doing when you're pulling out that baritone voice of yours and you're talking from that beautiful place.
Thank you. You're so sweet. Continue. No. It's just to say that it's this beautiful symbiotic relationship because in order to
Yeah.
use your voice, you need your vagus nerve, but using your voice relaxes you, which brings up the vagus nerve. So it's this beautiful, beautiful
There you go.
connection.
There's
And
another one.
so
Sing and relax.
sing and relax and sing and be uncomfortable or imperfect or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Just
Just
sing.
do it.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, my goodness, I've had moments on stage where it didn't go well. I'm a human being, of course. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
good, yeah.
and you plow on through and you say, we'll do better next time, and you just let it go because once you've sung, you're done, right? You just you can't change it.
Well, don't get me into that imperfect thing because that's been my whole journey on the spiritual path. When I first came into the yoga center, and Chris knows because she was my first teacher and mentor, I was very Rajasic, and I had to learn to be a bhakti because that whole center was full of bhaktis. They were all running around feeling things, and I was just like, put my head down and push through, and I will willpower my way through everything.
I love it.
So it's been quite a journey for me. So yeah, learning to relax and learning to do those things that you're talking about, be vulnerable and just, not have to control everything has been my entire journey here. So singing was, very much a part of learning how to do that for me, being an expression of joy and being okay with that.
And do we have to do things only because we're good at them?
Yeah,
I used to think so.
exactly. I mean, I find the things that I'm not good at, I love learning because that's such a great experience. But I found that people come to yoga and they have the same kind of approach. And we teach a lot of the higher yogas as well as hatha yoga. We teach meditation, and so this one student he'd been there a fair amount of time, and then he stopped coming. And a month or two later, he sent me an email and he said, I'm just going to tell you what happened. He said, I was mad because I felt like I should have been making more progress. And and he said, I was blaming the teachings and blaming the teachers. And he said, I just had a breakthrough and realized that it had nothing to do with any of that. But that's that same thing, that we do to ourselves, or fortunately in yoga, other people don't do it as much as they do with singing. Singing is an area where people think it's not rude to say stuff like that. And I don't know why, but
it's amazing. We are so good at projecting our fears onto externalities, be it people, be it a situation. And all of a sudden there's this beautiful thing that realizes, oh, I'm moving through the world this way. I'm choosing to move through life this way. And as you said, Chris, it wasn't the practice, it wasn't the teacher, it wasn't the person at the coffee shop. It was me the whole time. It was me moving through the world that way. And so how we respond to things, how we react to things tells a lot about where we are on the inside. And that's why one of my favorite quotes is, if you want world peace, just find peace in yourself. And if everybody had peace on themselves, then we'd have world peace, right? But we always think of world peace as this external thing that we're all searching for. Whereas if you just find it on the inside and encourage everybody else to do it, if everybody has inner peace, that's world peace, right?
Yes.
So it's a way of looking at the world differently and maybe not blaming people so much or things or situations. And there are things that happen to us that are almost unforgivable. I recognize that. People have been through trauma and tragedy, and I'm not taking away any of the reality of how hard that is when I say that. I am not trying to pass off anyone for what they've been through. There are things that are almost unforgivable, and I acknowledge those. We've all been through them. I assume everyone's been through them. Yet there's this light that comes from saying, okay, that's a thing. That's a thing. It doesn't have to be a good thing or a bad thing. It's a thing that happened. Now what? How do we move through that? Acknowledge, recognize, move through it.
Yeah.
And learn to find that inner self. I love what you just said, because when we do go outside of that searching, then we start judging and controlling. And that's where a lot of religious wars have come from. That's where a lot of drama and pain has occurred. So yes, this is why we devote ourselves to teaching yoga, because we want people to know that inner guidance, that voice inside, that's who you should be listening to, because that's the best.
Oh, yeah.
That's the best source. So, but this is actually gives me a great chance to segue into a question I wanted to ask you, because I heard you say that people can hear a lot from someone's voice about their emotional state. That was something that really caught my attention when I heard you say that. So I want you to talk about how that works, but also how can we as humans take that and become a more empathic friend?
Well, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, because what's amazing is we live in a world where everybody wants to be heard.
Yes.
And
Seen and heard.
everybody wants to talk, and everybody wants to have their opinion validated, and everybody wants to just be heard. But the only way to be heard is to listen. And we forget the listening part in terms of getting along, because we don't really hear and listen to what people are saying. It's just a lot of, dare I say, yelling at each other a lot of the times these days. It's just talking over each other. And yet, all of a sudden, if you listen, you go, oh, that's what they meant. Or, oh, that's not what they meant. Or you get this sort of,
Right.
I call myself a lie detector test sometimes, because you can just hear in the tone quality, the cadence of someone's voice. You know, if somebody says, I'm fine, you go, are you? Are you sure about that? Right? So there is this way that we if we really do listen, and it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, and I try to turn it off sometimes, because other people's secrets are none of my business, right?
Yeah,
It's none of my business to judge other people or know what's going on with them.
Yeah.
But when you do really start to listen, especially, as I will admit, as somebody who as a voice coach talks for a living, one of my favorite things to do at the end of the day is listen, because I've talked all day. It's time to listen. And that silence in nature that I mentioned in one of my biographies is so important to me. So it really starts for me, Kathy, from a listening place.
Because when you're deeply listening, and as a coach, which is some of the work that I do, you connect in a way that you can't any other way, in a way that you can hear things that you would not be able to hear unless you were all there, all present, all being, available for that particular person. So I think, listeners, what I wanted you to get out of that is that, when you learn to sing, you're connecting on such a deep level to your inner self, to your soul, and to that being's connection to the rest of the world, and that really connects you in a way that you can be better in community, in a way that you can be a much more empathic, compassionate, loving friend. And like you said, learn how to deeply listen to other people. That's a skill that I think if somebody asked me what's one thing I would give everybody, it would be that one.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. So that, we need to get, Western culture is broken. We need to get back to being friends with each other and family and community and all of those wonderful things. And this is how you do it.
The voice was the first instrument.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
before we even
tell me the story.
But even before we even had words, right? We had these primal utterances. We knew intuitively, way back when, millennia ago, that there was this sound that we could make, and then all of a sudden we had words. And one of the problems with words is they're beautiful, but they also confuse people. And words can hurt, and they can box people in. And so I love words, but I'm also aware of the power of words. And so as this was the first instrument, every instrument since the voice has really tried to sound like the voice. That's really what you're trying to do. Any instrument that you study, the phrasing is all based on the singing voice. It was the first instrument. And so it's amazing to me how out of tune we are with each other's voices when it is one of the most primal parts of who we are. And before we had the wheel, before we had fire, before we had all of that, we had this, there was these sounds coming out of us. We didn't have language, quote unquote,
right,
but we had sound. And so I just think it's time for us to get back into our bodies and back into our voice.
Oh my God, I would love to talk about that more. We still got a little bit of time, but it makes me think about, you're right, because the minute we have language, we have the brain kick in. And then now the freaking orchestra is off and running. And it's like, now what do you do with this mess? But think about shamanic practices when they drum and they go on a journey and all they do is hit a drum. you know, and they are connected. They are spiritually at one with each other. They are, I don't even know how else to describe it, you know? I mean, I've watched them I mean, just the feeling of hearing that drumming and how quickly it takes you into the soul and puts you
Mhm.
right in the center of who you are.
Well,
I
I
mean,
have a question for Chris about that then.
okay.
Because, Chris, I'm so curious. Once you found that voice teacher who talked about the two things, the muscles being in alignment and the confidence,
Right.
when you found that confidence, how did your speaking change when you were teaching? Did you notice a shift in that? Did you find that confidence sort of get into that cellular level for you as a teacher? I'm so curious.
Yeah, there was a incredible opening,
Yeah.
that happened. It was really amazing. And I worked with him for a while and I made a lot of progress. And towards the end, he said, the main thing I have done for you is to tell you can do it. And I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, that's constantly what we're telling people, in yoga. you know you can do this because it's natural to do this. It's not natural to live the way we live with our, the turbulent minds. And, it's much, much different. But yeah, I found a huge, huge opening. It was, all kinds of things opened within me, my heart, it wasn't just the physical thing,
Yeah.
it was on every level. It was tremendous, and
Oh, I love
Can I
that.
share my experience of you, what happened at that time? Because I need your permission to say a little bit about what was going on with you at the time. I remember it clearly
yeah,
because she had a real heart expansion at that time,
yeah.
because that not being able to sing was connected to an experience she'd had with her mother, who was a musician. And so there was a whole
There was a
healing
whole
process that happened there that was let go of. And then all of a sudden, this whole new world opened up.
Yeah, it was actually a tremendous thing. My mother she was a concert pianist, and she was a child
Oh,
prodigy. She played Carnegie Hall at 11, and she stopped performing professionally, after she had me and whatever. But she had that kind of MO, and so when this is hilarious. I mean, when I started taking piano lessons with her, she dragged up her teacher because she only played classical music. So she dragged up her teacher, and I said to her teacher, "Can't I play chords and songs instead of these scales all the time?" And the teacher called my mother into the room. My mother came in and fainted. So I mean, this kind of drama.
Drama queen.
Right. So I ran out and my grandmother saved me. So,
oh,
but but I told my grandmother I wanted to dance. I didn't want to play the piano anymore. But the thing was that there was something tied up there.
hmm.
Yeah.
As many things as I had released through yoga and whatever, I always knew there was a little something there.
Yeah.
And it was actually when I started singing that there was just this huge breakthrough in it, and a complete understanding of my mother in that experience, that so
But
it was.
it also took your yoga teaching and availability to another level,
It did.
because it
Oh,
was stopping her
absolutely.
from, chanting and playing the harmonium and
Right,
being,
right,
100%. And so, yeah,
right.
her classes and her students benefited a ton by that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I loved chanting then after that, it was
Yeah.
great, but I think that there was that breakthrough, that was amazing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful story. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
There's something else that we should talk about, which is the health of the voice, because, people who teach and give presentations all the time, they're using their voice a lot. And,
Hmm.
you know, and not just singers, so I'm wondering if there are things that you suggest to people for, keeping the voice healthy and being comfortable.
One of the best things about the voice health tips that I give is as soon as I start listing them out, people start to go, oh, that's a good general health list as well. It's very much connected to the whole body. Because, of course, as we talked about, Kathy, a moment ago, that emotional state being expressed by the voice, your physical state gets expressed by the voice a lot. When you have a cold, what's the first thing that tells you you're getting better? Your voice is coming back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
right? When you don't sound like yourself, when
Right.
you feel like you can't speak, or you say, oh, I don't feel
You
good,
have
right?
that nasally sound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have that sound. As soon as your voice starts to come back, it's this beautiful indication. And it's very unconscious. People don't realize it, but
Right.
that's how they start to get more, I don't know, more dopamine flowing through their bodies because they know they're going to get better, right? They have a sense, oh, I heard myself. Because I always like to ask, are you in there? You're in there? Okay, cool. Let's go from there. You're in there somewhere, right? And then they hear themselves. So it starts with sleep. It starts with sleep. The more rested you are, and of course, I know people talk a lot about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I have a slightly different interpretation. I do love 7 to 8 hours as a general rule, but I'm also a fan of quality of sleep.
Mhm.
Because if you have 8 bad hours of sleep and somebody gets 6 really good hours of sleep, and that's what their body craves and needs that night, you're going to be way more set to go if you have good sleep versus just randomly worrying about, oh, I'm supposed to get 8 hours of sleep, which then just stresses you out and then you're not sleeping well. So I always say, focus on how you fall asleep. Focus on the quality of your sleep rather than some thing you saw on Twitter that says if you don't get 8 hours of sleep, you're going to die. You know, these things you see on social media, right? So it starts with the quality of sleep. It moves to hydration, making sure that you're hydrated and understanding what hydration actually is, because people think electrolytes are Gatorade.
That's true.
Electrolytes are sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. Those are the 4 electrolytes. Doesn't have to be Gatorade or Powerade. It's about making sure that you have enough electrolytes, especially after a yoga class. If you have a very particularly fast-paced moving vinyasa class, let's say, or an Ashtanga class that makes you sweat a lot, make sure you replace those electrolytes. The next thing is finding out the triggers for heartburn. What are the things that give you acid reflux? Right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's tomatoes or onions or garlic, the ones that you hear about being culprits. It's the things that trigger it for you. There are plenty of people who can eat acidic foods and be fine. Because remember, there's nothing more acidic than your stomach acid. There's nothing more acidic than your stomach acid. So yes, we have found certain acidic foods can trigger a lot of people, but that has a lot to do with the bottom of the esophagus and the way that it relaxes that opening, that sphincter that keeps the stomach acid out of your throat, than it does with any particular food that's
Oh,
universally going to give anyone heartburn. Heartburn comes because the relaxation of that esophageal sphincter, not because of the onions themselves necessarily. So finding out what works for you, but just eating a balanced diet, which yes includes some ice cream in the summer. Thank you very much. Enjoy your life. Have some, I know, fuchsias, Kathy, right? So get some, live a balanced life. Be grateful that we don't have food insecurity, right? Grateful if you have food. Enjoy
right.
your food,
Yeah.
right? And yes, eat nutritious, a nutritious meal, but also have some cake because life is,
I
life
like
is
this guy.
short, right?
Have some cake and ice cream.
Yeah, people always think I'm going to be perfect with my diet. I say, no, you got to live a little. You got to live a little.
That's boring.
And then also just thinking about warming up your voice. Just because you don't sing professionally doesn't mean you're
Yeah.
not a professional voice user. Making sure that you do some basic warm-ups, making sure that you have a nice steamy shower for a minute or two before, because there's nothing better for your voice than steam. The voice loves a nice steamy environment. And then just paying attention to giving yourself breaks throughout the day. If you talk a lot, making sure that you take 5 to 10 minutes, checking in with your posture. How am I using my body, right? How is the balance or structure, as I prefer over posture? How am I using my body? Am I being kind to myself? Am I very stressed? Because when we're stressed, we don't use the voice very well, right?
Right.
Another thing to think about is, I'll say it, substances. How much alcohol did you have the night before if you have a big presentation in the morning? It's very drying for the voice. How much caffeine is charged up in your body and making you, jittery and all that stuff? What are the stressors going on in your life? Did you really take the time to breathe before you spoke? Did you give yourself 2 minutes just to meditate, just calm and get yourself in that zone, in that flow state? Have I missed anything? Oh, and then thinking about some pharmacological considerations, thinking about some controlled substances and over-the-counter substances. So, for example, if you have any singing to do or any particularly, how would I say, extended speech, be it a conference or something where you're really projecting into a room, please avoid aspirin and Advil.
Oh,
The thing about blood thinners is that blood thinners cause your blood to flow really quickly, right? And when you have blood flowing more freely, you think you have more power to your voice than you actually have the structure to support. So if you have a
wow.
headache, if you have any pain, please, if possible, I know it's not as effective as Advil, please choose Tylenol. Please choose acetaminophen or something that doesn't include a blood thinner, because there have been famous stories of singers blowing out their voices
Oh
because they
my
took
gosh.
an Advil before they sang and they hemorrhaged their voice because of Advil
Even a
or
trained
blood
voice.
thinners.
Wow. Even a
Oh,
trained voice does that.
even a trained
Wow.
voice, because again, you're thinking, oh, I feel good. I sound good. I've got lots of, oh
Maybe
no.
we should-
Whoops.
And you, whoopsie, and you blow it out because you have all this blood flowing. So you're thinking, I'm feeling good. I'm sounding good. And you don't necessarily have the structure to support that. So thinking about substances, and the other substance I'll mention, especially in warm climates, is allergy medicine.
Mm,
So allergy medicine that is meant to dry out mucus. The problem is, lots of parts of our body are coated in mucus in a good way. There is
right.
mucosal
Need it.
lining to a lot
Need
of
it.
parts of our bodies,
Yeah.
including the vocal folds. The vocal
Okay.
folds naturally have a mucosal lining, which makes them have that beautiful flowy thing. If you've ever seen them under a strobe light, they have that beautiful sort of pattern to them. That's from that mucosal lining. The problem is, Claritin and all of that, it doesn't know to not dry your voice. It just knows to dry
Oh, it's
mucus.
everything. Right.
It doesn't discriminate against different kinds of mucus in your body. And so any sort of antihistamine, anything that dries you out, when you're rubbing dry chords together and trying to sing or speak in front of an audience, that's just a recipe for nodules or polyps or things like that. So lots of things to consider
Wow.
about the voice. And sadly, when people ask me what substance, can affect the voice, my answer is everything. All of them.
Yeah.
That so that makes me wanted to ask the question of, so somebody's listening today, and I know you've taken away a lot of tips from this conversation, but say you're a public speaker,
Mhm.
say you're grandma talking to little children, say you're actually gonna, maybe you're in a choir or you're gonna go out to sing later today, what would be the one thing that you would have them do before they go out to sing? Like, to me, I would think, just chanting Om is gonna like open up all your throat and make you relax up top. But you're the coach. Tell us what one thing we could do before we get on stage. What would you have us do with our voice?
Honestly, my answer is a physical warm up.
Okay.
If you've ever ended a yoga practice that felt really good and you were really in the flow, your voice just drops into that easy
Yeah.
place, because the best voice warm up is a whole body warm up. Because remember, we love to say, here's the larynx, and we got la 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 la. We do all of this voice
Okay.
warming up.
Yeah.
But as we've talked about for the last beautiful hour of this, thank you for this, by the way, is we've talked about how the voice is an entire body experience. So any mind body practice, be it Pilates, be it Tai Chi, be it yoga, be it
Okay.
whatever is your thing. Because
Right.
I don't like to be too prescriptive about what floats your boat. If you love Tai Chi, go out and do
Love
Tai
it.
Chi.
Yeah.
If you love badminton, go play some badminton. It's for you to not feel like you have to fit some mold, but
Right.
do something physical that gets your blood flowing, that gets you sweating a little bit, that gets you moving, that gets your joints loosened, so that when you're standing there singing and talking, you are not tense already. You've already warmed up your whole self.
Right.
And when you feel good physically, you feel better spiritually. And when you feel better spiritually, you speak and sing better, because it's all that connection. So
Perfect.
it's always hard to choose one thing, but I'm going to answer your question with one thing, which is a physical, hopefully mind body physical practice.
So what I heard him saying, and how I would take away that, is whatever it takes, physically, mentally, emotionally, get yourself into a state of balance, harmony, mental, emotional,
Absolutely.
physical harmony. And of course, you've already done the work in getting your apparatus working, and now you're aligning. Now you're aligning and ready to get into that place where you can let spirit flow through you in a divine kind of way, which is so
Because
beautiful.
if I tell you exactly how to do the physical warm up, if that doesn't align with you,
Yes,
Doesn't work.
exactly.
Doesn't
I
work.
love
right?
that. I
it isn't
love
going to
it.
work. But if whatever it may be, if a hike, because I'm a huge hiker, I love
Yeah.
hiking. So if
Yeah.
a hike gets you connected to nature and you feel like there's blood flowing and you're breathing and you're connected spiritually, great. Don't do yoga if yoga is not for you, right?
There you go. It makes you happy, do it.
Right, you do.
Cute. Okay, well, so we have had so much fun, and you're thanking us for the
Great.
hour. We're so
Awesome.
happy to meet you and be able to talk to you. And so look, let's just say, is there anything that you want to tell the people about I'm interested in what you're planning for your future. So if you would tell me that, like, what is your vision for the next few years? What are you focusing on? What's important to you? And anything else that you might want to say to our listeners, or tell them where to find you, or whatever it is that you would like to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Of course.
I would say that my plan for the future, after some recent tragedies and some recent hardships that were very unexpected, has been to really get back in touch with myself.
Okay.
I have been taking care of a lot of other people for a long time, and I realized that I wasn't taking care of myself, especially through those things that, yes, did happen to me, but I'm trying to learn how to react to them, right? That's, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to do that through serving others in a way that serves myself too, so that everyone's on the same page.
Wonderful.
And embracing the good kind of ego that I need to take care of myself without becoming obsessed with myself in that way where you can, because I'm told by friends all the time, okay, but how are you doing, Mark? You ask everybody else that, how are you doing? So my projects from this point forward, if they don't align with me, I have to say no. I'm learning to say no, with love, with grace, with gratitude, I appreciate the opportunity, I appreciate the offer, but I need to be better at recognizing what doesn't align with me, because I teach everybody else to do that, but I wasn't teaching myself that. So I want to be really honest and open and vulnerable with your audience today and with the two of you, that I need to recenter myself, and I want to do that without fear of being too egotistical about it. But they always say, if you can't take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of other people, right? And I need to do things that align with me. It's going to include writing a book, because I've always wanted to do that. I've always thought maybe I could share something and maybe touch someone that way. I'm going to be accepting online voice coaching students. So if anybody wants to work on their speech, if they want to work on their singing, please reach out. They're welcome to do that, because that gives me joy to do, gives me joy to work with people on their voice. So yeah, it's a long answer, forgive me, but it's, I love that. It's finding the balance between myself and not losing myself in the servitude of others that means so much to me.
Well, you have two new yogi friends that understand completely what you're saying. We have both been there, and me not too long ago, talking about self-care on a regular basis, not too long ago. And I just read a book back in 2015 that was I called it Always Choose Love. And it's all about what you're talking about. That self-care is so important. And listeners, for you at this stage in life, if you haven't gone through that and really put yourself first, there's a lot of women that are putting their families, kids, parents, everybody before you. We're talking to you too. That's the same experience that we're talking about. It's so important. And
bless all the mamas and grandmamas out there. We love you. Thank you.
We love you for bringing us in and taking care of us your whole life. So, and we're both mothers too. So
one of the things we always say at our yoga centers, you always want to be practicing selfless service. That's very important, but you can't be a hospital. You can't really serve if you are not well. So
I love that.
Yep, your cup has to be full
first.
Yes. And so reach out to us anytime. I feel like you're a new friend.
Yeah.
I feel like you're two beautiful new friends. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being here, listeners. And we can't wait to hear your feedback on this one. Please tell us what you think. Please get in touch with Mark if you want to learn about singing or any of the other things that he's doing. I'll put the notes to how to find him in the show links for you. Okay. Big love. See you.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.